Can I have a confirmation in the chat that you can see and hear me? Yay. Hey, Matt, I can't hear you. Is everybody able to hear you? Do you want to turn on your mic and test that, Matt?
Does this work?
That's better, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Well, this is how you start the last session at the end of the day. Philip, thank you for moderating and for reaching out and getting us some help. Well, for sticking with us. We're off to a slow start here, but as Matt said, we'll keep you to the regular time. We're so happy to have a big group here. Thanks for hanging out with us. I'm Mike Deutsch, my colleague here, Matt Griffin. We're going to talk today about sense making. Let me do my screen share. Am I doing a window or a tab? I forget. Okay. Okay, so folks, just like every other session today, you've got access to our slides down below the stage. There should be a down arrow that you can click. Welcome to our session, What's Happening Here? Sense Making in High School Computer Science. We ask everybody to be mindful of the ground rules. These are the same ones that you've seen in every other session today, provided thoughtfully by the CSTA organizers. We do hope to have lots of participation. It's most likely going to be in the chat, so keep your fingers ready. Okay, here's what this session is going to look and feel like. As advertised in the program, we are not going to introduce you to new programming platforms or tools. We are not going to supply you with technological tools or new content. What we are going to do is introduce you to our favorite way of introducing new materials through a teaching routine, an instructional routine. And hopefully you'll come out of this with a new perspective about how to teach new computer science concepts and how to introduce assignments with your students. So format-wise, we're going to try this routine together twice with a Scratch project and then a JavaScript project. We're going to spend some time talking about the pedagogical ideas and the intent behind this and what effects we think this supports. And then we'll talk about putting it in action in real life. And hopefully we'll still have some time at the end for you all to talk back and think through some ideas of how you'd use this. We think you'll get the best results out of this if you have some computer science teaching experience, if you already know what platforms you like to teach on, and if you already have in the back of your mind the units that you teach consistently year to year and the assignments that you give out, you understand your repertoire. And if you're coming in with some curiosity about how to strengthen your students' understanding and the strategies that they have in your toolkit to approach the things you're teaching them, and if you'd like to broaden participation in your classroom and success. So, of course, the ground rules for CSTA are, if this is not you, by all means, we're not offended. You're welcome to go check out something else. There's lots of great things happening. Okay, we haven't had time to set up a poll, so what I'm going to do is my speaker notes on the side here, and I'll ask you to put your fingers on the keyboards and answer in the chat. Do you teach computer science, CS, or other subjects? And in fact, you can say CS and other. CS, other, or both. Just interested to know who we've got here. And Matt, if you wouldn't mind taking a look at that, because I don't have visibility at the same time.
It is mostly a stream of CS with some others coming in, CS and other, but it does look like almost everyone's got at least some CS as part of their repertoire. Cybersecurity a couple of times.
I'd also like to know, is everybody here a high school teacher or something below the high school level? Oh, you are active and ready to type. I love it. This is
yeah, this is an amazing group. Well, I mean, we set the whole chat thing up really with all our jokes earlier.
Yes.
Mostly high school, some up below high school and through high school.
I see a college. I see AP Computer Science. This is terrific. Okay. exactly what we're aiming at. And the last question I'd like to ask is, when we say sense making in the title of this session, does that mean anything to you? And you might answer with, it's new to me, I've heard of it, or I use it in my teaching. It's new to me, I've heard of it, or I use it. Sense making.
Critical thinking, constructivism. One that flew by was, it makes some sense. Very funny. Building understanding through using your senses. I love that. And then some enthusiastic yeses.
Yes, I see. Hey, I'm just going to say hello to Deborah and to Corey. It's nice to see you both as I see the names scrolling by. Okay, so that's good. That helps us situate ourselves here. So some of you are familiar with sense making. For some of you, it's going to be brand new. We're just going to launch right into the participatory section of the workshop here. And I'm going to share another tab. And it's going to take me a moment to get there. But I'm told that this is the most efficacious way of doing this. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, we're going to start an instructional routine here. Instructional routine is a pedagogy talk. I don't know if that's familiar to you. The routine I'm going to do here is called Notice and Wonder. I learned about this in the math education world, and it's making its way across different fields. So it's possible you've encountered this. I'm going to ask simply, as I demonstrate this project here, what do you notice? You obviously can't put your hands on this project, which ordinarily we would do in the classroom. I'm going to ask you, take a look at this, interact with it. What do you notice? That's the first question. And the second question is, what do you wonder? Now, because we're virtual, you're going to have to drive me. I'll be your avatar, and I'm going to ask you to put your fingers on the keyboards as I hit the green flag. What do you notice? And I mean it just that simply. I want you to use your eyes and ears. Don't think too hard. Don't interpret too hard. Don't get too many steps ahead. Just what do you see? And Matt, can you read a few things out?
A game. 2 options. Buttons. Pac-Man. A loading screen. 2 choices. Opening screen. Title. Yeah. The maze game.
Right. I'm gonna dig in on buttons because that's an interesting interpretation.
Yeah.
Someone out there is interpreting these two these 2 red rectangles as buttons because, would that person mind answering again? Because why? Well, they sure look like something you can click, right? They look 3-dimensional. So rather than
rectangles with text.
Yeah.
You know what? A couple people in a row said past or prior experience, which is
perfect. Great. That's exactly what we're hoping to see. So rather than reveal how to play by taking us to the instructions page, I'm going to click Start. And now, what else do you notice? Continue in the chat. What do you notice? I'm not going to do anything just yet. What do you notice?
A maze, a timer. A timer coming up, counting up, sorry. Blue walls with a yellow space. A level indicator. There is a player on the top left.
There is a player on the top left. So I'm going to pivot to the next question. What are you wondering right now? What do you want to know about how this program works that you can't yet? You're going to have to ask me to try things. What are you wondering about?
What do the squares do? How do we get points? What's the goal? What's the goal again?
Okay,
you're all score. What happens when you hit a wall?
What happens when I hit a wall? Okay, well, I'm wondering, first of all, like, how do I hit a wall? I don't even know what my controls are yet, because I think the interpretation is right. You're all very experienced. You understand this is a game. Someone said Pac-Man before, somebody said maze. And in fact, the title said maze game, right? So anybody want to suggest to me how I move around? I'm assuming I'm that red character. That's a fair assumption.
Arrow keys, WASD.
Yep. I'll start with WASD, and I'm tapping those. That doesn't seem to do anything. So let's try the arrow keys. Yeah. Right, up, down. Oh, you hear a sound effect there? There's a sound effect for me. if we assume this is a maze, which seems to be a fair assumption, and somebody was wondering what happens when you bump into the blue wall, well, that's what happens when you bump into the blue wall. What if I try it again? Yeah, it seems to do that every time. So we've discovered one of the behaviors of this program. What was another thing that somebody was wondering?
What happens if you hit a purple square?
I was the same thing. And did people hear the sound effect? Bumped into the wall?
No, the screen share is muted.
It's sort of a sound. Now, the purple sound is much cooler. It's a shame you can't hear it. The like a lasery sound. I didn't reproduce that really well. I'm going to try that again. Can anyone interpret what that purple block is doing?
First of all, a good observation, there's no lost point. And now a bunch of folks are saying it seems to go to a random location.
Yeah, I think we've done enough testing of that one to interpret, yeah, that takes us to a random location. I agree with you on that. What about the score? Has anyone noticed what is affecting the score? Because I'm at -6. I started out at 0.
We've observed that the purple square does nothing, and a bunch of folks are saying bumping into the wall affects the score, takes you down by 1.
So I'm so close to the green square, I'm going to test that first, so I don't have to go through the whole. Oh, okay. I'm on level 2. I just noticed that. I'm going to bump into the wall again. Let's do a test. Boom. Okay. So what can we say, just in normal language? What is bumping into the blue wall doing?
Bumping into the blue wall, score down by 1.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, a couple great observations. The green square seems to be the goal. And I like this one. Your score doesn't reset when you change level.
Oh, that's interesting. So since the blue wall is what's affecting the score, I'm going to try that again.
Your timer also does not change when you change levels.
Right. I just discovered a bug, because what's supposed to happen is when I hit -10 on my score, I get game over. That's an end of game condition. So, okay, I'm going to stop here. Actually, before I do, I'm going to call your attention to one other thing that nobody's called out yet. Anybody notice anything happening when I move my character around? Just looking at the character.
The eyes move. The eyes, do the eyes change? The eyes seem to shift.
The eyes do change. How about that? Okay. So I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to come back to slides, and we'll continue the presentation, the discussion. Okay. So what's going on inside this project? We haven't looked at the code yet. That's often where we start in a computer science lesson, looking at the code. And in effect, what we do when we start there is we're starting with the building blocks that are available to us. And we're asking our learners to project forward to what the ultimate behavior is. And the trouble we have in our experience with that, there's so many steps, so many levels of magnitude to go from the individual coding blocks in Scratch or in text languages to the overall behavior. That's a huge gulf for new learners to cross. And what we found is that leaping to the end with the end result, seeing that growth, being able to interact with it, really helps students subcomponents, subroutines, functions that are going on inside. So I think we hit all of the things here on this list. There was a title and instructions. We had a player character and a way to control it. There were different looks to the character. The eyes were tracking the motion. There were obstacles to move around. They had an effect on our character. The background or the level, that was a thing on its own that we had to build. Collision detection, kind of reset sequence. Anytime I hit a blue wall, a score, and a timer, and then end of game conditions. Those didn't work this time, but I told you about them. So there's an awful lot going on inside this project. This is actually quite advanced. My daughter actually built this when she was in 8th grade. in her ed tech class in school. There's a lot here, and we've found that an instructional routine like this really helps us get to a project like this. So I'm going to hand the microphone to Matt to talk a little bit about us and our organization.
Thanks, Mike. So next slide would be great. We're from Kids Code Jeunesse up in Canada. We're a Canadian organization, a charitable organization that delivers both in-classroom workshops and teacher training workshops across the country. And we have been thinking about and working with this type of instructional routine, thanks to Mike, for a couple of years now. And specifically, we're excited to be here today because we're spending a lot of time thinking about moving beyond our core audience, which has typically been younger students. How can we introduce them to code? This is why Scratch is a great place to start for us conceptually, to the high school space. And it's a next slide, please. We were an early organization in Canada to introduce artificial intelligence and ethics into the classroom, a specific focus on the United Nations global goals, and dedication to girls and underserved communities across the country. If you can skip 2 slides ahead, please. Mm-hmm. Finally, just as we get started for a 3rd time in earnest, we'd just like to say that Mike and I are both here in Teotihuacan, which is also known as Montreal, which is the traditional home of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. And I personally feel like it's particularly important that we have this slide in this presentation today because Canada is reckoning with a lot of its troubled, terrible past right now. So very, very important that we're acknowledging the land that we're presenting on. And you can see this statement. We present all across the country, so it's important that we and our coworkers think hard about the land that we are presenting on every time we do a presentation. Next slide.
And Matt, while we're here, I'll invite anybody who knows the land that they're on to add that to the chat.
And why we are here. So again, my name is Matthew Griffin. What I'm going to be talking a little bit about today is the when Mike and I started talking about this way of thinking. My background is actually sort of dual arts and technology. I started in a math degree, quit, did a music degree instead, which is actually a very common thing to do, and then ended up in Chicago studying for graduate school at the Art Institute of Chicago. And when I finished, ended up with the very strange job of teaching undergraduate students, mostly freshmen, freshman art students, how to code, which was an art and technology requirement at that time. And I ended up working at the school for a couple of years and actually developing high school teacher training programs for art and technology for high school teachers across the States, which was such a fun program to run. But I knew from an art background this notion of noticing and wonder. It's the de facto language of how we talk about work and how we observe. But when it came to teaching art teachers how to interact with technology and specifically code, it was very, very strange because it was as though that wondering and noticing was gone, replaced entirely by fear. So it was teasing that out of them again, looking at a piece of software and getting them to wonder and notice. And that's when Mike and I realized I was using this language not because I was an expert in sense making, but because I had the language of an arts background, trying to tease that out of artists interacting with technology from a place of fear. So what we'll see is this led to some really interesting collaborations we've had. Specifically, the one I'll be talking about is with the Canada Council for the Arts. So we're gonna, that'll be, spoiler alert, one of the routines we do next. Mike?
Thanks. So I have a similarly angular background to get to where I am now, working with CJ. I had a computer science degree. I think I graduated as the worst programmer ever from UPenn's computer science department. Thank you, guys. What I remember most about being a CS undergrad was that I wasn't taught very well. And I maybe didn't have the stick-to-itiveness to keep with it and teach myself the way some people do. And that really left an imprint on me because I did remember the spark of excitement programming as a kid. I started when I was 8 years old on an old Apple II, which dates me. So I spent a career in the IT world and started volunteering with Kids Code Jeunesse when it began. It's now 8 years old, just had its 8th birthday, KCJ. And when the team started to grow, I left my previous career. I began at the same time a master's degree in education at McGill, and here I am today. So one of the things I try to do is bring in research and new computing education and other educational research into KCJ. And that's how I arrived at sense making for math education. So our organization is a little bit unique. We tend to teach introductory materials to generalists. That's really our bread and butter. We started in the middle grades, 3rd to 8th grade. We say that our audience primarily is generalist teachers and generalist kids, people who don't already think of themselves as tech savvy or interested in making things with digital tools. And we want to help them see coding as a material they can use for all kinds of different things that interest them. But because of our business model and our funding, we're generally just the introductory step for people who are new to coding. We come into a classroom sight unseen, or maybe with a single conversation beforehand with the teacher. And we have to make a workshop work, not knowing the history and previous experience of the people we're teaching. And so that has really pushed us to find techniques like this, sense making, so that by the time we're done with a workshop, everyone feels like they've accomplished something and that that's real. It's not just puffing them up and making them feel good. So a little bit about sense making, without getting as deep as I would love to. Sense making is often cast as the opposite of answer getting. And maybe that'll be familiar to you as an experienced teacher. When you teach in a way that supports answer getting, what you're really cultivating is procedural competence. When I demonstrate an algorithm and I demonstrate a series of steps and I ask you to follow me, you'll be able to do that. But that tends to result in narrow and very inflexible strategies. When you're confronted with something new, you'll only know how to approach it if it looks like the thing you've been taught before. And the question that students often ask to themselves or to the teacher is, did I do it right? Just looking for validation. Whereas sense making, on the other hand, is intentionally building conceptual and procedural understanding in a very flexible, rich way. This is how we understand people learn, by including new ideas and new skills into their existing mental models. And so sense making as a teaching method is an attempt to gear our instruction to match that. What we're hoping students will ask themselves is, does this make sense? And a really interesting thing in the research that I want to share, that in school, now each of us is doing sense making all the time, but in school, sense making happens socially. This is a really important insight. So the way we structure our classroom and the way we introduce things will have an impact if we take advantage of the social dynamic. And you may see, if you read research or you attend webinars, social constructivism. So instructional routines, there are a number of instructional routines, even if you don't think of them as that you'll be familiar with. The follow me step by step, that could be in the form of a document. This is a code club project, for example. That's also pedagogically called gradual release. I'm going to do it. Then we as a class will do it, and then you individually will do it on your own. It's also called direct instruction. Here, folks, I'm going to show you how this works. You may also, as computer science teachers, be familiar with take this partially built thing and remix it, modify or extend it. In other words, I've taken you so far. You use your creativity and your ingenuity to go the next few steps. And of course, this is not you giving out an assignment that has specs. I'm describing to you the overall behavior I want this program to have. Go build it. But as I said, what we found in our introductory workshops is we have much more success when we start at the end. There's an interesting subtle message when we show something that we've built. The subtle message is, this is something that was made with my own hands. I was able to figure out how to do this, and probably you can too, and I'm going to help you get there. I'll scaffold you towards understanding it, and then towards understanding the blocks that went into it. So really what we're asking when we notice and wonder is, what do you think this program might be doing on the inside that's helping it achieve the effect that we all see on the outside? I'm going to try to fly through this, Matt. Let's come back to the notice and wonder routine that we did with Scratch. And I'll ask you in a very meta way, what did you notice about that instructional routine? Hands back on your keyboards. Throw in a comment in the chat. What's something that you noticed about dynamic that was happening when you were driving me and noticing and wondering about things?
High participation, exploration, no wrong answers. Love that. We had to think about what we saw.
I was reading
others thinking.
Oh, I really like that one.
I wasn't doing other tasks. That's great, Corey. Also, I've been guilty of that once or twice today.
Okay, and now if you've got any experience with Scratch, my next question is, share with us some interpretation you have about something you saw in that program and how you think it works. For example, the main character was a sprite. I think the walls were, I don't know, what do you think the walls were? I think the counter was some understanding that you have of how something in there was built.
Collision detection, key events, moves, face sprite. The sprite had different costumes.
Mm-hmm.
I assume you used costumes for the sprite. Very good.
The colors were the key. When an avatar hits a certain color, yeah. So the really interesting thing about Scratch, it's just like every other programming language, is there are actually multiple ways to implement any of these mechanics that we want to have. So the walls could have been sprites. They have collision detection built in. Once you get some Scratch experience, you know that. But it also could have been blue stripes, blue rectangles painted on the backdrop, because colors have collision detection too. Multiple ways to get there. And the point of notice and wonder is we're not getting into the particulars yet. And in fact, we want to encourage people to come at it from different angles, because each of us has seen things before that are slightly different to what our neighbor has seen before. I'm going to advance to my next slide. Here are some of the benefits that we think. Now, some of these come from the research and some just from our experience. When you start with a routine like this, you are leveling the playing field, right? Everyone has their own eyes and ears and fingers and can interact with the thing and poke and prod and interrogate it, see how it works. The cool thing about the social dynamic, and somebody said this in the chat, is that we all get access to everyone else's thinking. Now, ordinarily, as a teacher, when you do direct instruction, everyone out there has access to my thinking. But I'm the one who's done the thinking beforehand, and I'm broadcasting my ideas to them that they can absorb, hopefully. It's rare, unless you do an instructional routine like a think, pair, share, or a work with your neighbor, or your elbow partner, or those are maybe elementary school names, but in high school you've got those two small groups. Unless you do those things deliberately, most people in the classroom only have access to my thinking. They don't have access to one another's, and that really broadens the different strategies. Okay, I've covered that. A little bit of the history of this was from our experience. Also, we hear from stakeholders because we're a charity. We talk to funders, we talk to universities and high schools. They tell us that there's a gap in even majors, even computer science majors. People in the discipline will often master the syntax, but won't really know how to put the building blocks together to approach a new problem. And we would call that sense making. That's our term, not theirs. And then some personal experience. I tried to help my daughter learn Python and found exactly this. And Matt brought his same issue from a very different perspective.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, when I was running these basically summer camps in Chicago. The main goal for me then and for us at KCJ now is to really meet people where they stand. How can we take away that fear that you might have with something like this? And when you master the noticing and wondering, especially if you're a high school arts teacher, that's part of your tool belt. It became approachable. The problems that we had were all of a sudden not how do I do that, or what do I do next, but how can I use this? And that was a very powerful moment for me in the front of the class, and certainly the people in the class as well.
So are we ready for your, oh, okay. Help yourselves to these in the slides. I've been very encouraged to see more people using the term sense making. In where I come from, it goes by these names in math education. It sometimes goes by these names in arts education. And it's been very cool to see at CSTA last year and this year, increasingly people talking about sense making as a thing, or at least using techniques that really resonate. So I'm going to leave that there, a bunch of references. And now let's get to Matt. Matt, do you want to do screen share or I'll stop?
Yep. I'm going to do all of my Chrome tabs for speed's sake. Okay.
Do we, just before you start, Philip, do we have a time limit hard stop? Like, do we get kicked from the room?
I think technically it's 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And I'll keep the suffering to a minimum by going, well, I'm going to start with the same questions Mike started with. So this is a different language than Scratch, but it is a program that I've built. Okay, the room ends at 5 minutes to the hour. So, and this is my program. It's running. So the first question, put your fingers on the keyboards again. What do you notice? All right.
Not a lot. Blank page, light blue.
I'm really glad that we're getting some colors in there.
You need to refresh. Thaddeus, I don't know if that was aimed at Matt.
It's broken. What do you wonder?
You've baited the hook, Matt.
Do we need to interact with it to do something? Well, let's try. One of the suggestions was click. I mean, I can tell you it is doing what it should be. So I'll click. Okay. I wonder if there's a problem. Oh.
Oh, do it again. Ooh. Are you dragging or just moving? That's a good wonder.
Really good question. So I actually only clicked once, and now I am not clicking anymore. So mouse up. So click again.
Someone knows some JavaScript. Mary is interpreting what kind of command is going on here.
It's a draw program in the loop section that follows. All right, that's a lot of notice. There's a lot of noticing and wondering. Oh, the size of the pen changes. What happens if you move fast? Okay, let's see.
Speed equals size. Random generator for size.
Okay.
The color dims but stays there.
Move slowly. Okay.
Somebody noticed color intensity.
There is a shadow of your movements, kind of like revision history in a Google Doc. Kind of random, but I also think it does get bigger when you go fast, and then not random. Okay, these are great. Speed is related to size. What I'm going to do is we're not going to unpack the code, similar to how we did in Scratch, but I do want to show it to you. this is a program written in P5.js, which is a platform that we've used a couple of times when specifically engaging with non-CS students as a way into projects like this, way to engage aesthetically, and way to engage with syntax, or rather to affect the aesthetics by changing some of the parameters in a program. So we can work with students who maybe don't come from a CS class and get them up and running quite quickly. So yes, we can see in the program that size is a function of speed. We can kind of parse how the fading effect happens. That's line 12, but as I said, we won't dig into it too much. But what I like about this piece of software, Mike said there's a couple of ways we could have made blue walls in Scratch because there's a built-in collision detection because of color. The platform you use is so interesting to me because there's so much built into something like P5.js. Loops was mentioned in the noticing and wonder part, but loops are built into P5.js. So when we introduce it to students, they don't actually need to understand the syntax of a for loop or a while loop because a draw function is just there when you open a program. And that automatically loops. So it breaks down that barrier for a learner in that scenario. We don't need to create variables to store mouse position, which would be required to make size a function of speed, because mouse X and mouse Y are variables built into the software itself. So we could do this program, which in other languages would be a heck of a lot more than 22 lines. Actually in less than 22 lines, I've got a couple things that are not necessary in here. But it's a great example. And when we did this, we had a collaboration this year with the Canada Council for the Arts to introduce arts-based students, high school arts-based students to coding, but also artificial intelligence. And we did something just like this. We gave them a presentation mode of a P5.js piece of software and had them play with it and had them basically create a flower by manipulating parameters. And only then did we show them the code. And then in fact, within an hour, we had them manipulating a machine learning library to have voice commands affect the image that they created. This is a much simpler version than that, but it does show that this sense making, as Mike mentioned, really does level the playing field and took away all that fear, which was the same for the high school teachers as we saw with the high school students. I'll leave questions about this if there are any to the end, but let's keep going so we don't actually go over time. And maybe, well, Anthony, that's a really, really great point. I don't even know how to begin answering that question. It's something we think about all the time when building a new project like this, because the level of abstraction and processing is a necessary evil for some things, but certainly not always good. Okay, I'll stop sharing. Well, how would I keep sharing to the end, Mike? How about that?
Sure. Anthony, I think our approach is you'll get to the particulars of the platform when you get to the particulars. The important thing to get first is, what are we trying to achieve?
All right, Mike, back to you to...
Okay. T's and S's, teachers and students. So just very quickly, we'll share this bit.ly link. Why don't I type that in? So in order to support this routine and to get students from notice and wonder to actually building something, we created this in-between step. And we just started to roll this out before COVID hit. So got to be honest and say that we haven't used this in classrooms. We've used it in a couple of teacher training PD events, but that's it. It's gotten a good reception so far, and we've test-driven it with friends of ours. What we're trying to do on this sheet is to separate out 6 different kinds of subcomponents that tend to come up in programs on a particular platform. We've got one for Scratch and one for text programming. That's a 2-page PDF that you'll see in that link. And we invite you to take a look, download this, and you might find that this is an extra helpful step in between the rudiments, the blocks or the text commands that you're teaching your students, and then sub-assemblies that add up to overall behavior. So we have that as a PDF. This is what it looks like if you've done it by hand. That was my own daughter with the Scratch maze. And then we've even done this digitally on a whiteboard. So there was a comment earlier about a Jamboard or something like that. This is a really interesting exercise to do, a notice and wonder with a shared board. You may find that some people interpret the same thing as belonging to different parts of the program, which is interesting to dig into. If you skip ahead, Matt, I'll just show that we've got some resources at the end. Oh yeah, extra thanks to Stefania and Carla and Erica Wang who give us input on this. They're awesome people. And then the resources, back a couple, please. Yeah, do I not have resources? No, okay, this one, more sense making at CSTA. Thank you, sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so I took a scan through and I've been tweeting this. So if you'll join us, I'd love to make this a thing. Okay, these are the hashtags I'm using to collect a playlist of the different sessions at this year's CSTA, and who knows, maybe other conferences too, other materials. People who are talking about this as a thing. So that first breakout A from code.org was fantastic this morning. I was at that. And I hope the rest of you will attend these others. Let us know and let everybody know who else is talking about this, because we find it's a really fertile avenue to go down. And maybe we'll end with ideas from the group here. Does anybody want to volunteer a project that you can think of that you've taught before, you're going to teach it again next year, and maybe let's try and notice and wonder. Let's try some sense making. We'll take a volunteer in the chat, or we could even take a microphone if we can figure that out, or is that tempting the puppet gods?
Emily did ask a great question. Do you do this with programs that are command line and not graphic based? And absolutely. In fact, that was before the P5JS. There was it straight Python you were doing? We have about 3 minutes before the platform will close. Thanks, Philip. I do want to say, if you are, in particular, a Canadian educator, we have a bunch of stuff that we can offer you in the slide deck. I think this would fit in well with the code.org CSP make tasks. I don't know those very well, but totally look into them.
Hung Yi, so we start by showing students the end result and let them figure out what's going on. Well, in a way, I wouldn't say that we're letting them figure out. We're really supporting them. As a teacher, to do this well, you're orchestrating a conversation between your students, right? When you do a notice and wonder, the way I've seen it in a math class, the teacher will be writing ideas down on the board, things that people notice. That gives students credit for the things they see, encourages participation, and it also helps to make connections. Did anybody else see this? Or did anybody interpret that differently? You can really make a rich conversation. And then, yes, you get to build it.
And one of the things that I've noticed in the presentation of it, you get a wider variety of solutions than you perhaps otherwise would.
Thank you, Libby.
That's awesome to hear, Rebecca. Well, we're going to get booted in a minute, so I'll just say thanks again and hope to see everybody around the conference tomorrow. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Philip, for getting us onto the stage.
Thanks for staying in, everybody.
Yeah, and tolerating our 10 to 20% faster talk. This was the Gilmore Girls version.
I'm going to tell my family that. They'll appreciate it. That is, thank you.